Hello and welcome to another episode of the Another Good Decision vodcast by the Governance Institute of Australia. My name is Patrick Gallagher and today we're joined by Dr. Marcus Bowles, Chair of the Institute for Working Futures. Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Marcus, I think we'll start off a little bit. I'd love to hear about your background and current position, if that's okay.
Sure. As you said, I'm the chair of the Institute for Working Futures. It's a company I founded in 1990, many years ago, when talking about the future of work and building future organisations was still considered very new. I'm also the co-founder of Capability Co, which is a startup organisation that's dealing really with the products coming out of the research and background that I do. And obviously, I also hold a number of university professorial positions.
Fantastic. And Marcus, the first question I have today, at the start of the year, the World Economic Forum released its Future of Jobs report. And that was a great report looking at all the skill sets and changes of skill sets leading into the future. And one particular statistic that I saw was 39% of skill sets are looking at changing by the year 2030. And the first question I have is, what can businesses do, organisations do, to get ahead of these shifts in capabilities?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum, the WEF, love big percentages and big numbers, nice grabs. They do a report every year and they always have a grab. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was 40% of all accountancy would be going and therefore the profession would be dead in a few years, which proved not to be quite correct either. So I think a big thing about it is what they're doing is they're really alerting to people to the fact that we don't have a stable workforce anymore in terms of the jobs and how they're defined. Got to remember that they're looking at how we classify jobs and how, for instance, the Australian Bureau of Statistics collects data on jobs that have been classified by them, and they fit into nice little verticals of particular industries, and then they're sorted into occupations. That sort of model is really an echo from industrial age where everything was very static. What's happening is that we've got a very dynamic workforce. And the problem is that the skills churn, if you like, the use by date, the perishability is increasing, not decreasing. So the fact is that we've got a number of organisations who have types of work that will no longer exist as technology comes about. The big thing about that, as we'll probably talk about in more detail, is that the focus they've got is on technical skills. In actual fact, it's the human capabilities, the human skills and the professional capabilities that are being remarkably stable. And those things actually are far more dominant in the workforce than technical skills.
And so when looking at those particular skills, for an organisation, how can they balance upskilling their current workforce as opposed to hiring new skills and new people to meet certain skills? What's the balance there between those two things?
It's, again, probably one of the areas that we need to challenge, that there is a balance. What you've got to do is the whole agenda at the moment that's been pushed by the vendors who are pushing all these skills descriptions and taxonomies and all of these frameworks are basically saying that we need 23,000 skills and we can describe every job and we can do it very dynamically using AI. The reality is that the human capabilities and, again, the professional skills are probably 63 to 70% of every job profile. The technical skills, that 30% that are making up the jobs, will change dynamically. And instead of thinking about recruiting for those 30%, get the 70% right first. And in that 70%, make sure your human capabilities include the ability to learn, to adapt, to critically think, to problem solve. They're enduring. They last 20 or 30 years. We've been tracking them and they change very little over the 30 years that we've been tracking them. So focus on building a workforce that's ready to adapt to any new technology and recruit for those things as well. Don't just recruit for short-term technical skills, because what you'll end up is what we're seeing with a number of our clients, where they've got people who are technically incredibly gifted and completely incompatible with their culture, unable to focus on their client needs, and really have no alignment to the particular values and the working teams that they're trying to put together. So people with great technical skills don't make necessarily great employees.
That's quite interesting, particularly around sort of the human skill set. And I guess you mentioned it before with AI, and I imagine a part of it when looking at AI and digital transformation is having the capabilities of leadership. So how do we ensure that organisations can keep pace with this digital transformation and AI by having the capabilities needed around leadership and to lead change in organisations?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot in there to unpack as well. So when you start to look at what's inside the innate abilities that humans have inside them that are the reason why we can collaborate, the reason why we can critically think, there's also the reason why we can lead others, or we can lead projects, or we can lead the knowledge gathering and the advancement of knowledge in particular areas. Everyone has different strengths. The issue is if we're looking just for the skills that person has, and technical skills, again, you talked about AI. The success of AI is dependent on human capability first. We're losing track of the fact that if you have critical thinking, adaptive mindsets, and the ability to problem solve, that wrapped around the ability to use AI actually makes it very effective. The problem with one of our clients at the moment is they have great desire to deploy AI. They've skilled people spending millions of dollars on AI training for a large workforce. And now they're making errors at a faster rate, not actually solving problems. And so what we're seeing is if you don't get the leaders who understand that they've got to build a workforce that is appropriate for the context they're working in, and AI is not just about what people can do with it, it's also how and why we're deploying AI. That's really important. And from a governance institute point of view, from a overall governance point of view, it's absolutely critical we get those guardrails and those understandings of the consequences of what we're doing. And that's cognitive. It's not skills-based, technical skills demonstrated in tasks.
And so particularly these big areas like AI, cybersecurity, green economy, things like that, coming off the back of that discussion, Governance Institute obviously looks at a strong capability framework and capabilities to meet these changing skills that are needed in the future. And we're very much focused on providing a capability framework for a structured view of governance. What other governance structures are out there, and how can organisations harness them to keep pace with these big areas?
Yeah, and having contributed somewhat to the capability framework that was developed by Governance Institute, the big thing was they look beyond just a job. So if you're looking at a job, then we look at the role someone does. And again, back into those verticals and the old career structures that are really being destroyed at the moment. You've got to remember, if you're using big numbers, and the World Economic Forum certainly puts some out there. Let me add some to that. You've got nearly 200,000 jobs, according to the Australian Technology Network, that will be created by 2030 that have never been in the economy before, but they'll be created by AI, automation, and the next wave of AI, which is artificial superintelligence, where quantum and AI come together and have a love child. And we're starting to do things at greater speed. We're starting to see the whole workforce shift to new roles and new ways of doing things. So what the Governance Institute did was actually say that there's personal capabilities, which is really what I was talking about before, the things that allow us to work with other people to think in a particular way, but also emotionally connect. Empathy, incredibly important when we're trying to design human systems and put AI into place with it and understand what it means for the humans involved in and the consequences of what we're doing. The other one is really then they had the professional practices. And those professional practices were really about the standards that the profession has and expects its members to have. They're behavioral, they're value-based, they're very much the difference between just using competencies and skills to do things, but it's also then humans involved against some standards, and then we've got a balance. That's unique in the world. The only people who were looking at this were really the Canadians. There's a number of things that they do. You've obviously got the international standards, and was it 37 and 0 cubed. Now, in terms of what we're doing and how it's been built, the frameworks that people are building tend to focus on the roles. And the biggest thing about governance and what we're seeing in the workforce that's emerging is the skills, behaviors, the capabilities that governance people have isn't just in isolated roles. It's been spread, diffused across the whole workforce. So we're starting to see that there's large areas of the workforce where governance hasn't been an issue before, But particularly in startups or in technology, governance is becoming a critical aspect of what they're doing.
And very much curious, how does culture in an organisation affect the implementation of change when it comes to upskilling and implementing new capabilities and skill sets? Is culture a big factor?
It's a huge factor. It's the most important factor. We tend to, again, I guess I'm echoing the same things, but when we take a skills first approach, people focus on skilling people to do a job. And if they don't have the skill they need to perform, we're going to give it to them. First and most important thing is, why are we all here? An organization, by definition, is a collection of people who come together to achieve an outcome. Anyone that comes together in a collection of humans needs a social fabric, a set of values, guardrails that say what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Those factors mean that, this whole conversation, hopefully one of the key things, and I guess your questions are really fleshing this out and asking me to say it, but it's not just a framework of skills that we're trying to build. It's got to live in an entity. It doesn't live on the framework. It lives in the cultural context within which we're putting it. And in that context, it's not just technical skills. It's got to be how we want to work together, how we want to achieve things for our customer base, how we're building a brand value. That's uniquely competitive to an organization or a society or a region. It's not something, when we're talking about skills, that we tend to think about, but it is the most important reason why skills need to live and breathe in a context.
Fantastic. And an area I want to look at is micro-credentials come up quite a bit as a flexible learning solution. How effective are micro-credentials in addressing a skills gap or a future capabilities gap?
Yeah, so micro-credentials, when we were first dealing with them, and I was involved in some of the very early projects in 2012, 2014, most people in Australia don't realise that Deakin University and a number of think tanks actually came together to produce the first framework in the world where micro-credentials in their purest form were shortened forms of the macro-credential, which is the qualification. So qualification has using modules or subjects, but then we're breaking it down sometimes even further, and we're delivering them in short form learning, which can still occur pretty much in a workplace or in shorter blocks, and then they're stacked together, and that becomes a micro-credential that credits back to the full qualification. So what we were doing when we're doing that, and the big thing that we've been trying to do, is really simple, and that is that modern, chunky, big curriculum forms that we see in traditional university or even in vocational education with their competency national courses, they're too slow to change. They're not keeping pace with these new jobs that we're creating, with how AI has reshaped how jobs come together. Remembering that universities, and particularly the vocational system, deliver on those verticals, on occupations and disciplines. There will be a governance and business course. There'll be a governance and law course. But in actual fact, what we're seeing is that, as I said before, and as a really good example, I'm dealing with an organisation, a very large telecommunication company. It needs governance in project management. It needs governance in the way they're treating people with their data and how they're dealing with customers. So we need a micro course that can then be recognised in a way where we formally recognise a lot of that more short form, informal, and often experiential based learning that's occurring in the workplace and in life every day, but isn't being picked up very well and isn't meeting the needs when we look at the traditional delivery structures for large educational entities and their qualifications. So they can work incredibly well. The difficulty that we have at the moment is that most people are measuring their outcomes because of the learning and how engaged is the individual. Did they get the learning that we wanted? Did they reach the standard? How many people have got? That's not what we want in business, and particularly if we're building professional capability. What we want to know is, has it had an impact that's positive on the career for that person? Has it had a positive impact on performance and the culture of the organisation that's using them? And that measurement is still very much in the formative stages globally.
Wonderful. And what are some of the barriers organisations face when beginning the conversation to upskilling? I did notice in the World Economic Forum, it does touch on a few different areas, maybe the time, working busy professionals, obviously time's a big factor, maybe cost of courses. What are some of the barriers that you've come across when looking at this capabilities gap and organisations wanting to start off?
The gaps are huge. I mean, the biggest gap is understanding. And when I say that, the reality is that we've got employers who are dealing with a faster pace of change, they've got so many things that are happening at the same time. We have a lot of people complaining about how busy they are. Leaders don't have time to take the long-term view. They've got so many tactical problems they have to deal with every single day. It's really hard to sit back and actually understand that a lot of the things that we think are skilling shortfalls are actually because we've been training them for the people for the wrong things in the first place. Again, getting back to that earlier comment where we've got people where we might spend a lot of time at the moment skilling them in cyber, skilling them in programming, skilling them in and trying to fill talent gaps. In actual fact, we've got AI now that can do a lot of programming and a lot of cyber work and a lot of the other things where we were skilling workforces for. We need to stop and actually work out where the need for a skill is going to be replaced by technology in very short form. Where we're deploying AI is where we've got the biggest skill shortages, or it costs us the most, or we can't keep pace with the change that's occurring. AI can actually allow us to simplify, but also to respond more quickly. Skilling people and using AI to do those things is ridiculous. It's not going to create a career. What we've got to do is skill people to be able to understand how to deploy AI more wisely, to critically judge whether that AI and the automation project is going to have a positive consequence for the organization, for the clients. So I guess I'm not saying that the skilling isn't real. It really is an issue that we've got to reskill more quickly. But we're reskilling people for a job task, trying to use new technology, spending lots of money getting them to use AI or to getting them to use cyber. But in actual fact, the reality of the technology deployment will remove a lot of that need in the short form. So we've got to focus on building longer term, enduring skills that don't need to be updated so quickly all the time.
Fantastic. That's very interesting. And I guess what pops into my mind is once again the importance of leadership and governance structures to start implementing these decisions and changes. But the next question I was going to jump into was, we spoke a little bit about culture, but how does inclusion and wellbeing come into the factor when building future-ready organisations?
Again, this is very much the human factor that you can have the best skilled organisation you like, but if their mental well-being or their cognitive capacity or what they feel good about themselves as humans is being counteracted by the work environment, then they're not going to perform. They're not going to deliver the outcomes that you want. You can't develop future capability in a toxic environment. I have a client that spends a lot of money and time trying to identify toxic leaders where they know that, for instance, there's 8% of the leadership group that are causing 80% of all of the people who will leave in the first 12 months of being appointed to that organisation. They find the right talent, they bring them in, and then they lose them in the first 12 months and have to replace them all again. Those leaders are incredibly toxic. And so well-being isn't just an issue that is what some people think is very trendy. It's very good business practice. And that gets to inclusion as well. You've got to be able to harness all people and what's inside them. Everyone is more than just a skill for the job that they do. And particularly if you're looking at neurodiversity or people who don't fit the normal thinking mold, that's what you should be embracing in a modern, future-orientated organisation. We need that bit of creative friction. We need that slight behavioural or perspective abrasion that occurs when people look at things differently. We've got to keep on stimulating and being able to not only hold in place the idea that we are good at what we're doing, but also understand that we've got errors, and people should be allowed to call those out or see better ways to do it. So not only wellbeing inclusion is important, but that means we've got to build the culture that allows that to happen. It means we've got to be far more authentic, particularly as leaders, to have an honest conversation with people around us. And instead of finding blame, encourage people to find out where there in actual fact is a problem. Be able to encourage people to talk openly and honestly, and to be able to accommodate that within the particularly the climate that you're building within teams and structures within an organisation. And it very much comes from the top down. If you don't have that basis, it's not just about culture, it's about ethical and as I said before, empathetic regard for each other. You've got to build a system, and that's what an organisation should be doing.
Now, I don't want to repeat what was discussed, and also touch on WEF's big numbers, but one of the statistics that did come out of this year's report was 11% of Organisations interviewed and workers, 11% of workers may not receive the skills and reskilling required to meet these future capability changes and demands. Are we at risk of, particularly for Australia, a two-tiered workforce where some organisations have adopted these capabilities and some simply haven't?
Yes, I think it's absolutely the case. And it echoes back, and it's probably this is where we're starting to fold on. There's a level of complexity in all of this, and 11%'s conservative. Um, we have employers now who expect the skills, the technical skills within their organisation. 30% of those skills every 2 years need to be refreshed. So you think about that. We're now at a stage where technology is changing so fast that we actually have the part of the workforce, nearly a third of the workforce, in it needing to be reskilled in those technical skills every 2 to 3 years. They're becoming so perishable, so changeable. We've got to go back to the fundamental question about, have we got people who can learn at speed? Have we got the ability to learn in the workplace? We can't build these big chunky skilling courses, stop what we're doing, send them off on a course, bring them back and expect them to do the job straight away. We've got to skill people in the context that they're learning, and we've got to do it in a continuous manner. Otherwise, we're going to be hitting these cliffs of competence all the time. The other thing we've got to realize is a lot of what we need for the future workforce already exists inside people, that innate capability, the ability to learn, to adapt. But we don't recognize it in our education system. We're giving people discipline-specific qualifications, but the employer has no insight into the fact that this person is misogynistic or has incapacity to learn or is afraid of, making decisions and wants to blame everyone else every time something goes wrong. They have no accountability for what they're doing. These are all behavioural aspects that people need to be aware of themselves to choose the right career, but employers want to know as well. So when we're talking about the two-speed, we've got to realise there's a lot of people out there in the workforce without qualifications who are absolutely perfect for development for the roles that we're creating in this future workforce. These 200,000 jobs that don't exist today that we will need in the workforce by 2030 will come from people who are not necessarily holding qualifications, who have not necessarily gone straight to university from school. They will most likely start working for an employer who feels it's a better long-term investment to find the people with the right culture and human capabilities and the professional resilience that we are talking about, for instance, in the Governance Institute's capability framework, and be able to nurture them and learn on the job. And basically, instead of having this concept of you do your qualification, then you go to work, we'll see people much more doing qualifications while at work and the employer providing a lot of the context for that learning to occur. And that's the critical area where particularly professional bodies will be leading the new wave of professional development and education. They'll be having technical expertise, but also understanding standards of practice and be able to do that within the workplace, not just within the classroom.
Absolutely. It's a very insightful area to look at the moment. It's such a topical area with these big changes and big topics. But that concludes my questions today. Dr. Marcus Bowles, thank you so much for joining us today and providing your insight on this topic.
Thank you, Patrick.